All right, so here we are again doing once again another podcast, and I am joined today by Barbara. I'm not going to say your last name. I'm going to mess it up.
It's Bliley.
That's what I thought too.
Yeah. I get it all. I get Billy, I get Bailey, I get any number of variations.
Yeah. So you are a brand strategist, right?
Yes.
So tell us about what you do, who you work for, all the fun things.
Okay. Sure. So I've been running my own shop for a little over a year.
Okay.
Scholar Consulting. And I work primarily with business owners, marketing directors, sort of people who are in charge of high-level strategy within their companies. They may have a marketing strategy in place,
okay,
but they need to put brand strategy and messaging in place because it comes first.
So you said you work with marketing people. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people probably assume that brand and marketing are synonymous, or
yes.
What's that word? Interchangeable.
Yes.
So what's the difference between brand strategy and marketing strategy?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So brand comes before marketing.
Okay.
Brand is your story. Mm-hmm. It's the high level messaging. It's your why, right? And figuring out how to shape the narrative that you want to create for your business. Mm-hmm. Marketing is then pushing that out into the world.
Okay.
Right. So brand, you've probably heard that, your brand is what other people say about you when you're in the room. You can't say, when you're not in the room to say it for yourself. Brand strategy shapes that narrative. It says, why do we exist? What problem are we trying to fill? How do we want to go about doing it? Why should people care about us? What is our story? And then marketing takes that and says, okay, so if our purpose is to save the world, we're going to say that in 3 different ways through 3 different campaigns across multiple channels and really get that message in front of people.
Gotcha.
So, yeah.
That's it?
Sure, for now. Yeah.
All right, so tell us a little bit about, where do you want to start? Do you want to start with, I have a business idea, where do we go?
Sure.
Yeah, so part of your brand is wrapped up in your name, right?
Yes.
So what's your thoughts on when people start, because there's some companies out there that are just, I don't know, we call it lazy, lazy when it comes to the name. We call it, unoriginal. I listened to a podcast the other day, and it was something involving the home inspection industry, what's going on. And one of the guys, big guy in the home inspection industry, he says he likes branding. When you name a company, he likes to name it something that can be tangible, right? That you can hold in your hand.
Interesting. Okay.
So green frog home inspections.
Okay.
So you can picture and visualize a green frog, right, as your home inspections. Because the company he was referencing is called Breeze, and he says, I picture a why don't you make a fan, like a fan, and that's your logo.
Okay.
So what's your thoughts?
Quite literal.
Yeah, right. So that's his whole thought. He's a very successful guy. And whatnot, but that was his take on when you name a company, you should name it. The imaging for that company should be something that's tangible, that you can hold, that you can visualize. What's your thoughts on that?
Oh, I think everybody's opinions would be different here.
Yes.
And there's no singular answer.
Right.
So naming is hard.
It is.
Finding the right name for your business is a lengthy process.
I think that's why most people just go with Sid's Home Inspection. Right?
I named my business after my dog.
Yeah.
So she's this adorable, obnoxiously opinionated husky, and I tend to think of myself in the same way. This guy's saying you should be naming something that's tangible that you can hold in your hand is an easy way for people to visualize, but not necessarily a reflection of the business that you want to be. And some of the most successful companies in the world have names that make absolutely no sense whatsoever in a vacuum, right? So Google, I'm sure it makes sense now, but it didn't without significant brand effort pushing that, right? Yeah. I'm not going to touch that one. Okay. I'm sorry. I have very strong feelings there. I think it's a shame. And
we're leaving it at that.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
I think whatever name your business goes for needs to be a reflection of who your company is.
Okay.
Right? So Green Frog, great. Yeah, that's an easy visual. What does that have to do with inspections? I don't know. But maybe it's based off of a personal preference.
Sure.
And if it's based off of personal preference, that means that your brand is taking into account the personalities of the people who are running your company, right? If you're a solopreneur, your brand is you. So you have a lot of leeway to use any kind of name that reflects your personal taste, your personal likes, dislikes, favorite sports teams, etc. If you're a business that wants to grow and, take on the world with, if you want to take on 10 employees in the next 5 years, well, that brand's pretty quickly going to have to go beyond your personal tastes, right? And Green Frog may or may not make sense.
Right.
Now, what becomes tricky is if you start with name one, and actually Twitter and X is an interesting case study because it's not done yet either. You start with whatever brand name.
Okay.
Twitter. And you work with it for years.
We're going to talk about this.
Probably. And but the longer you have it and the more brand awareness that you're building up, obviously the more brand equity that you're building up, right? And if you decide one day Twitter is no longer working and we're going to just change to X, if you're not Elon Musk, if you don't have the notoriety that he has, you're going to lose a ton of brand awareness and brand equity.
Yeah.
And so it really has to be done delicately.
I hate X. I hate it so much. It changed because I have Twitter on my phone and it changed and I was like, what is this?
Yeah.
I got so confused. It looks like it would be for a porn thing.
Yeah, it's it hasn't been handled well. And there's a reason why you shouldn't let one person in the company make these sort of decisions on changing the logo and changing the name and just, I had a dream and it's now going to be X, Y, or Z. Yeah. Who knows? Tomorrow it could be Z. We have no idea coming from that man. So, starting with if you start with a name, great.
Sure.
Run with it for a while though, right? If you choose Green Frog, if you choose Twitter, I chose Skylar Consulting. It wasn't the backstory of why I chose my name was I was supposed to actually be a consultant for a larger company and I just needed an LLC in place.
Gotcha.
So I was like, well, I looked at my dog and I was like, hey, you and I are a lot alike. I'm going to go with you. But now that I've been running with it for a while, if I change my name, that needs to be done methodically and deliberately. And there's a lot of considerations that go into it, right? You would create a teaser campaign. You would certainly let your best customers know in advance, hey, this is coming down the pipe. If I had an app like Twitter on my phone and all of my users were going to wake up the next morning to a different icon, that takes consideration. You need to roll that out.
It does. So I just finished my 4th year in business, right?
Okay.
November will be 2 years. I guess October we started making the talks. So 2 years ago.
Okay.
I got approached by a guy who owned National Property Inspections, NPI, right? NPI is a franchise, owned by an individual guy. You know how franchises work.
Uh-huh.
And he's like, hey, I'm done. You want to buy my company? I'm like, sure. Can I think about it? He says, yeah. He called me. He's like, hey, kind of need a decision. I got to start this new job soon. So he was done. So that's what he did. He contacted all of his, high volume agents and agents that's been with him for a long time and said, hey, this is what's happening. Right. it's no longer be MPI. It's going to be 360 home inspections. You know, the only thing changing is I'm not doing inspections, you know, but you have the other guys there, right? Because he had a couple inspectors, right?
Okay.
So, but he took that time to reach out to those clients and say, hey, I'm not doing it. This is who it is. You know, we can sit down, we have lunch, we have meetings, you know, you introduce me, just to take that time to say, hey, just when you call, it's not going to say MPI. You know, it's going to say 360 home inspections.
Right. Sure.
So that was very helpful. You know, now we still got those phone calls 6 months later, like, I'm looking for MPI. Yeah, they don't exist anymore.
Right. Yeah. It will take some time.
Yeah.
Why, when you purchased MPI, what was your decision process behind not keeping that name and that brand?
Franchise, because I'm not a franchise.
Okay.
I didn't want to pay franchise fees.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah. Otherwise, if we were to say it wasn't a franchise, I just don't like the name National Property Inspections. It just doesn't resonate with me. So 360, the reason why I chose 360 was for two reasons. A background in the fire service, the first thing you do on scene is you do a 360 of the property or car wreck or fire or whatever it is that you're doing, right?
Okay.
So it's kind of a callback to a previous life of mine, right?
Uh-huh.
But also, you know, for home inspection purposes, 360, we cover everything.
Sure.
Kind of thing. So it had a double meaning there.
Yeah.
So that's why I chose that versus, you know, even if MPI wasn't a franchise, I still wasn't going to choose MPI.
Right.
I just don't care for the name. The colors are like, I mean, it may hurt some feelings, but, you know, it's like I don't know, very dull green and white. It's just not my thing.
Not a reflection on you and the kind of business you want to have.
Yeah,
and
it's
the
not even
brand
like
that
a pretty
you're building.
green. It's just green. So it's just not my thing, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Brand attributes totally play into your visuals, right? So you know, that 360, what you were saying, this full circle look, it just the number means holistic, right? That you're gonna think of everything, you're gonna, you know, consider all of it, and your customers or your clients aren't going to be concerned that you're missing stuff.
Sure.
Right. So, funny that you talk about the colors. When you are a small business or a solopreneur, not a franchise, right? Because when you're a franchise, you really don't have any control over the brand. You don't. You have no control over the messaging. You have no control over the visuals.
Yeah, not how the website looks, nothing.
Yeah, right. And, you know, so I know you work with a lot of realtors. So realtors who work with the bigger brokerages have very little control over their brand marketing.
Correct.
Right?
Yep.
For example, if you're working with Keller Williams, well, then you're using the Keller Williams brand.
Yep.
But at the end of the day, we work with people that we like. And so you are, or, you know, Jane with Keller Williams. I don't know if there's a Jane with Keller Williams, but we're going to talk about Jane today. And, you know, so she doesn't have control over what her business card looks like or the website that she's using, but she has control over her own story. She has control over why she became a realtor to begin with. She has control over looking at gaps that exist and, you know, injecting her own personality into the process that way, right? And you would do that through networking. You would do that through podcasts like this to attract people who, you know, Keller Williams brings, you know, a fair amount of I can't think of the word, value to the conversation, right?
Just because of who they are.
Yeah, I'm thinking panache is the word I'm looking for, right? They, you know, they have a lot of resources. They're a big trusted name
in the industry.
Yes. So I know if I'm going to work with a Keller Williams agent, then I'm working with somebody who is backed by significant resources. Right. But what I need to know as a homeowner is that I'm working with somebody I personally can relate to and can, you know, get along with, right? So brand, there's different levels there that you start to think about. Like, I have no control over the Keller Williams brand, but I have control over my own personal brand. So
what's your thoughts on rebranding? right? And
Yeah.
because for a lot of people, because I didn't consult anybody when it was like time to name, right? That's just something that, like you said, it's a reflection, right? But for a lot of people, they come up with a name, they get traction, and it's either, I don't like that name no more. You know, I was just first thing that, like I said, I needed an LLC, right? So I just filed something. But, or I don't like the logo, or I don't like the colors, or again, maybe you do merge, right? And maybe it's not me buying over, it's an actual merger, right? And now we got to come up because you don't want to use my name, I don't want to use your name. Who are we now?
Right.
And now we got to come up, and that's an expensive process.
It can be.
A lot of people don't understand, because there's still stuff out there that says MPI, it's never going to go away. There's still phone numbers out there that ring that shouldn't be ringing. You just can't get it all.
Yeah.
So what's your thoughts when it comes to rebranding? When should you rebrand? Because it is a big endeavor, or can be. And just overall.
Okay. So I love this. There's a few reasons that there's a few scenarios that would come up that you want to consider if you're going to rebrand or not. You're right. It can be expensive. It can be time consuming. It should be handled thoughtfully. One would be mergers and acquisitions, right?
Okay.
If you are merging with another company, or you are looking to buy another company that has built up their brand awareness and equity, you don't want to lose the valuable equity that you have, either of the companies, right? If you're merging, then you need to think about, does one company have more equity than another? What sort of hit to your reputation or loss of awareness are you going to be taking into place? And because if company A and company B are going to merge, is naming your company C the best value there?
Yeah.
Or do you want to run with one of the two existing names and continue to capitalize on some of that equity? So mergers and acquisitions would be one of them. Competition would be another. So if you are constantly losing out to your competitors, it may be a lack of awareness. It may be time for revisiting your brand strategy and then your visual identity to rebrand.
Because a lot of people, they start off with Joe's Plumbing, and then Joe's Plumbing hires an electrician at some point. Right. But he's still Joe's Plumbing.
Yep.
Right. So he's losing a lot of electrical business because nobody knows he's an electrician.
So that was another reason I was going to list. If you are either adding a new service line or product line, or you're moving into a new market, a new vertical, for example, you want to consider whether the name you chose is still an accurate reflection of the business. And you just nailed it, right? If you're a plumbing company and you hire on electrical because you want to be more holistic, more full service for home services, well, you're going to fight an uphill battle if you don't start considering maybe I need to rename the business.
Right.
Another major reason to rebrand is simply, have you even looked at your brand in the last 3 to 5 years? Because brands get muddy. They get outdated, right? Visuals get frayed.
Sure.
And the market, as the market changes and customer perceptions can change and, society in general is evolving, how does that affect your business, your messaging? Because when I think of a rebrand, when most people think of rebrand, they're thinking of their logos. They're thinking of the visual pieces. When I think of rebrand, I'm also thinking, is my messaging still firing on all of its cylinders? Has my why evolved?
Right.
It probably hasn't changed entirely from when I started my business, but has it changed along the way, to as I've identified more need, or maybe I've filled some of that need and that it may have opened up a different avenue, right? So a rebrand it's not just your visual. It's looking at all of the strategy and the messaging together.
What's your thoughts on combining names? So, for example, I'm 360 Home Inspections. There's we'll use Burgess because I talk to Scooter and he's fun. But Scooter's been around for 30 years, right? He's probably pretty sure he's the largest home inspection company in the area, right? Let's say we merge.
Okay.
But like you said, I don't want to lose what he's built up over 30 years, right? I don't want to lose what I've built up. But, we changed the name. Like, hey, let's go with 360 Burgess or Burgess 360, whatever version of that. So what's your thoughts on that?
My thought on that is it would have to be based on data that you would collect.
Okay.
And on the surface, as you've presented it, on the surface as you presented it, Burgess being the bigger company and having been around a lot longer, my gut reaction is if you're going to use one of the two names, you lead with his name, right? But
don't tell him that, though.
It's our little secret. But when you are going through a merger and acquisition, you should be doing some market research, right? You should be talking to your customers. Is this what are your customers going to expect? Who else in the market do you need to be aware of? And when you are prepping your customers, because you're going to have conversations with internally and with lawyers and with marketing people, like, how do we want to approach this? How do we want to shape this together? If it was Burgess 360 or 360 Burgess, well, that's an easy way to keep your equity. That's an easy way to keep your awareness.
Yeah.
But are you missing opportunities for a different name at that point? Because the forces that you both are bringing to the table, right? So you're combining for a reason. Why are you combining? And that's an opportunity to introduce, should we be looking at a different name or not?
Right.
So
that makes sense. It makes sense. So when it's time, Courtney's phone's ringing. So we've had sirens and now we got phones. So
by the way, you couldn't hear that on the recording. You could hear the sirens, but you couldn't hear the phone.
Yeah.
Just letting you know.
So what does it take to develop a brand strategy? So what are you looking at when it's time? Like, hey, I'm coming to you now, right? I'm not coming to Blair because he doesn't know how to do brand strategy, right?
Blair understands brand strategy.
But I'm coming to you because you said, because again, I got Blair, right, for Talking Monkey Media. For those that don't know, he was on the podcast, talked about all that marketing things.
Yep.
And he's doing the website and the SEO and all the things, right?
Yes.
So now Blair says, hey, you need to go get your brand stuff straight. So what are we looking at? Like, what's the actual strategy, right? Because, I know what a strategy is, but what is a brand strategy?
So your brand strategy it's your attempt to influence and shape the narrative of the reputation you want your brand to have, right? Or I'm sorry, the reputation you want your company to have. So, I said back in the beginning of this, your brand is what other people say about you when you're not in the room to say it yourself, right? And you don't have a ton of control over what the words they use and their actions and the way they think about you.
Unless you give them a lot of money.
Unless you, or your ex, and you can just generate the conversation.
Don't care. Yeah.
But in a way, you actually do have a lot of control because your brand strategy is how you want to influence that perception. It's how you want to influence the words that they would use. And, so you've probably heard of a brand platform. I call those springboards because they are quite literally the launching point of the messaging that you're using in this strategy. Your strategy is this overarching guide to your narrative. And it's, if we start in the middle of your springboard, it's your purpose, right? That's the very first thing we figure out is why are you in business? It is, what gap are you trying to fill? What problem are you trying to fix? Why? And, if your answer to that is, well, I wanted more flexible hours or I was tired of working for the boss, you probably have to dig a little deeper, right?
Yeah. Says every real estate ever. And
it's important though that the purpose, because it drives so much of your strategy, you really need to go deep on that one. If you're a realtor who's saying, well, I just love helping first-time home buyers, you and like 80 other realtors that I've met, right? It's so while I'm sure that's true, I'm sure that's part of the purpose, it's not enough, right?
Yeah, it's not going to differentiate yourself.
It's not, exactly. So, but so the purpose, figure out your purpose, figure out your why. Your vision next to it is, what do you want to do with that purpose, right? What kind of change are you trying to make? And the mission is, how are you actually going about doing it? What is your process for doing that? And they accumulate upwards into brand proposition statement. And then, okay, so I do this because of this, and this is how. But then the top piece of your springboard is what we call your brand promise. In 3 to 5 words, can you articulate your why and get people to care about you and make it catchy and all the pressure that brand promise brings? So that's the top part of your strategy. The lower half of the springboard is brand attributes. It's and this is where your personality really starts to shine through. So your brand attributes, there's 3 buckets. There's look and feel. So your visuals, your logo. Logos get all the flashy attention.
That's right.
And with good reason, right? They're the, quote, face of your brand.
Not to throw you off track, but how disappointed are you when you see like a national brand spending millions of dollars on a new logo, and it's just like,
Kind of like the Gap logo years back, where it, I think it lasted 12 days, or was that Tropicana that lasted 12 days, and because it was so meh. It is really disappointing, and I think every brand designer, myself included, if I'm being honest, has done one of those before, where it's like you spend a lot of time and a lot of money and a lot of effort developing
focus groups and all that stuff,
all of it, right? And most of the time, the meh logos are evolutions of the existing logo, because you while you want to retain your brand equity, you're also working with executives who are scared to do too big of a change.
It's like the Miami Dolphins. They went from a jumping dolphin, they just straighten it out. Like, okay, that's a lot of anticipation for that.
Yes, and if you're spending millions of dollars doing that, I would hope that some of that money is being spent on the research and the data gathering to that ultimately informs you don't want to change the dolphin too much, right? One of the reasons brands or logos are evolving too is the digital application for them, right? The more our technology changes and the channels have evolved, the more simplistic the logos are getting. But going back to brand attributes in your strategy, so you have your look and feel, you have your tone of voice, right? Which is, how are you talking? How are you writing? The words you're using, the cadence. And then you have your personality. Are you quirky? Are you serious? Are you hilarious? Let that shine through in your messaging and your brand visuals and the various marketing pieces. And then the bottom piece of the springboard that we create are what are called guiding principles. So most companies have core values, right? And while I'm on that soapbox for a second, if you're going to have a core value, go beyond transparency and integrity. And, those are great, but what do they mean, right? So the guiding principles, though, you have an internal guiding principle and an external guiding principle. And these actually, they underpin a ton of your brand strategy, because they're based on your unbreakable promises. So internally, what is the single promise that you refuse to break to yourselves? Right. What is the one line you will not cross internally? For me, it's I don't work with companies that go against my moral code.
Sure.
And externally, what is the one unbreakable promise you're making to the market at large? And the market at large includes your customers. It includes strategic partners. It includes your competitors. It's who are you, when you go outward, what promise are you making? And those are pretty big ethical pieces,
Sure.
right? They're guardrails for your brand. And they become really important when, your customers want you to get involved in politics or hot button issues. And, you may or may not choose to do that, right? Small businesses are especially wary of getting into hot button items or, issues. But your guiding principles can at least help direct how you would talk about those things, how you would address them if you choose to, right?
So, yeah.
They're a true reflection.
And I'm
of what
glad you
believe
brought that up. Because I talk to other people and I get business and I've received business because other inspectors went off on political tangents on their personal Facebook page, right?
Okay.
And my whole thing is like, man, I got a lot of thoughts and opinions, right? But Facebook just isn't the place for it because I own a business, right? It's a reflection of my business.
Sure.
And you could even go back to what Michael Jordan said back in the day when they said, hey, why don't you take stands against Republicans? And he says, Republicans buy shoes too, right? That was his stand. So you're right. Like the things that we do center around military stuff because I'm a veteran, right?
Yeah.
So we're a veteran-owned company. So we'll promote, Veterans Day, Memorial Day, things like that, causes like that. It doesn't mean that I'm not for or against other things, but we have polarized and politicized so many social issues that it's just a grenade.
Yes.
So when in an area that you say, hey, are you for or against this? Man, it's hard to say.
Yeah.
Even if you are for or against it, because you're losing 50%.
Yeah.
Right. Because we're at a point where each issue is 50-50. And it's hard. It's hard for a small business. Like how many small businesses were putting up, I support all, Black Lives Matter, for an example,
right?
Just because they were just for intimidation, right? Did they believe it? Sure. Most businesses kind of try to stay out of that though.
I think one of the most important pieces when it comes to wading into politicized hot button issues, if you're going to do it, you have to lean into it all the time.
Yes. Because for a lot of these, such as the BLM movement, it was just specific times, right? When the protests were happening, and things like that.
I think of Pride Week.
Yes.
I think of what happened to Target and Bud Light.
Yes.
Was it this past spring or last spring?
It was this past spring.
Okay, thank you. Where, which also goes to show it doesn't matter what size company you are, you can get hit hard with blowback, right? What it comes down to is, do you believe in what you're saying enough to not care about the blowback, right?
Like Chick-fil-A, right? They're all in.
Yes.
All in on their beliefs. Whether you agree or disagree,
right?
They're all in and they have not wavered.
Right. So what happened with Bud Light, with Target, for example, for Pride Month, it wasn't just Pride Week, sorry, it was Pride Month, is that they put up these big displays, or Bud Light changes its cans for 30 days out of 365 days of the year. And otherwise, Target, that's actually not entirely fair of me because I know that Target does other things that support Pride, but it's regulated to the back of the store or little pockets of the store. Once a month, they put it front and center. And that doesn't feel like they're leaning into it fully. That feels like capitalizing on the marketing push. And that feels disingenuous. Yeah. Right? Yeah. So to me, if you're going to take a stand, you have to be unapologetic about it, and you have to do it at all times. Yeah. Because, like you said, you're gonna make some allies, you're gonna win some fans, and you're gonna lose some fans.
Yeah, absolutely.
But at least they know where you stand.
Sure.
Right. And if you become, wishy-washy back and forth, you're gonna lose everybody. Yeah. Right. So
and that's kind of what happened to Bud Light. They lost everybody.
They lost a lot. Yeah. And, it was really interesting when the CEO came out. I don't remember the numbers, but I remember the CEO coming out a few months later saying, yeah, we took a giant revenue hit.
20,
said, well, maybe
at some point it was like 26% drop in sales. And they shut down plants and laid off people and all the things.
It was
all
huge.
the things. They sold off. Anheuser-Busch sold off half a dozen or more brands.
Oh, really?
To a Canadian company.
I didn't know any of that.
All part of that. I mean, it's during that time you can kind of piece together, hemorrhaging money at that point, because 26% over several months, that's a huge chunk.
It is.
For your leading brand.
Yes.
We're not talking about, the 6th or 7th or 15th beer in your portfolio.
Yeah.
This is your flagship.
Yeah. But so that's Bud Light, right?
Yeah.
And you and I, we are not Bud Light.
No,
right?
we are not.
We're not on that scale.
No, we're just that guy that's down the street just trying to pay the bills.
Right. I want to share a story with you.
Sure.
If we have the time.
We got all the time. I ain't got no place to be.
There's a client I worked with earlier this year on brand strategy, and medical practice has been around 7 years, and the practice has grown and evolved since they started. So the practice came to me and said, hey, we are no longer this particular brand that we were when we started, right?
Yeah.
Our services have evolved. We need to update and refresh our messaging as a result. Perfect. Love it. So we got into it. And one of the things we were looking at, among many, was imagery. Mm-hmm. What kinds of images they were using on their website, across their social. And that included, they work with families.
Yeah.
And that includes families that are not necessarily man and woman and white.
Sure.
Right? Same-sex couples, interracial couples, interracial families, mixed families, you name it, mm-hmm. right? The medical practice's audience is made up of all these different kinds of families, but their imagery was not. And I said, you really should start using some imagery that reflects who your audience is, because while it's a subliminal thing, people want to be able to see themselves reflected in the messaging and the marketing that you're using. And my contact at this medical practice, she loved it. She was all for it. And then I got an email and said, I'm afraid to use this particular image on the homepage of my website because I'm afraid of the blowback I'm going to get. Like it or not, we live in a state these days.
That's where we are.
And it was heartbreaking.
It is.
To get this email from her because the woman who leads this practice is smart and strong and knows what she wants. And the people who work for this practice are incredible human beings.
Yeah.
And to think you don't feel like you can be a true reflection and your brand can be a true reflection of your values because you're afraid of the blowback. Mm-hmm. There's no easy answer to that. No. I wish there was, but I'll be the first to say there's not. And my response to her was along that line. Yeah. Look, you really have to weigh what's most important to you here. Maybe you don't use this image on your homepage. Okay. Maybe you use it on page 2 or, the about page or the services page or whatever. You still use it, right? Because it still matters. And, also, how are you ever going to know if you don't use it?
Right.
You can't predict the blowback that you're going to get.
Right.
And then my final response to her, piece of the response, was if you get blowback on this, and you're right, you may, those people aren't your audience. Those people are only trying to detract and take away the power of your brand, right? The people who are for your brand, the people who do want to work with you will appreciate the effort that you're putting into it.
They will.
And they're the ones who ultimately give you money, right? Again, we're not Bud Light. We didn't lose 26% of our revenue, and and we're not trying to play to everybody there. But the brand that you're building, you have to have your target audience in mind when you build that brand, right? Yeah. Because while your purpose, your vision, your mission, your promise, all these pieces of your springboard are a reflection of the narrative you want to build, you also have to make sure it's resonating with the audience you want to attract. right?
True.
You're not marketing, or you're not putting your brand out towards people who don't like you. At least I'm not.
Right.
You know, I'm putting out my brand towards people that, you know, they want to work with the type of person that I am, right?
Yeah.
So it's a minefield. It can be a minefield.
It can be, absolutely.
But I think it's really important that, you know, every company, their brand, like, it's as scary as it is, stake the flag.
Yeah.
Right? And lean into it.
Yeah.
God forbid you have to say I'm sorry at some point. Okay, then you say you're sorry.
Yeah.
But stake your flag.
Yeah. There's a brokerage, boutique brokerage in Richmond. There's a agent that also that we work with owns her team, and they are unapologetically for like the pride community, you know, LGBTQ community.
Okay.
All year round. You know, they do all kinds of stuff, and this is who we are. This is what we do.
Yep.
You know, whether that's our lifestyle or not, doesn't matter. This is our cause, and this is what we support. And there is no apologies there. That's you know, and good for them.
Yeah.
You know, because like you said, it can be very, very, and it's sad because again we've politicized all this.
Yeah.
And we've drawn lines in the sand over all this and over just supporting people, and communities, and it shouldn't be that way.
It really shouldn't. It shouldn't.
But like our target audience is people buying homes. You know, I need you to buy a home.
Right.
I don't care what you look like. I don't care what you do. I don't care, you know, what you do, whatever, you know, I just need you to buy a home.
Yes.
You know, and we have to walk that tightrope because we just need everybody to buy a home. And we need everybody to buy a home to call us, you know, regardless. And it doesn't mean we don't support people. It's just, again, navigating those things for that blowback.
Yeah.
You know, it's not that you're afraid of it, but there's a financial repercussion. Can be.
There can be.
There can
Absolutely.
be. And in a niche, we're in a very, very niche industry.
Yeah.
You have to buy a home for me to survive. and I can't get my business anywhere else. And if I blow that up, then it's hard. So you have to be very tactful and strategic with that as well.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean you can't support it. Doesn't mean you can't be part of it. You know, if that's who you are, if that's part of your makeup, you know, of where you want, again, I stick to veterans because that's what's important to me.
Right.
From
you have a personal tie to veterans too, which I just want to add to that. It adds to your authenticity. Yeah. Right. Because you can actually speak to what it's like to be a veteran.
Because you have a lot of people, again, you know, when protests are going on, you'll see businesses start throwing up, whether it's pride flags or Black Lives Matter symbolism, whatever it is, just because they say, hey, we're with you, but you're doing out of whatever, you know, it's not a tie. You're not emotionally invested in that.
Yeah.
And that can also backfire on you, you know, because you're not all in, you know.
At the same time, you have to start somewhere, right?
You do.
And some of it is we do better when we know better, right? When we know better, we do better. And when protests erupt and we learn about causes that we may not have been aware of before, but wait, no, that resonates with me. Wait, no, I agree with this side or that side. And if I choose to wade into it, well, then now you're into it, right? And that means this isn't a 2-week or a 3-week campaign. It's not throwing up a sticker in your window and calling it a day. It needs to be that deliberate decision. Yeah. Does it align with your brand your brand values and your brand's personality and your brand goals, right? Where do you want your company to be? What kind of strategic vision do you have there? But if it aligns with all of that, and it personally matters to not just, if you're a solopreneur, if it matters to you, if you're a team, does it matter to your team and your audience? Lean into it, right? Yeah. And if you're just starting, you're going to hit some blowback at first. Yeah. If you keep going, you're going to start really attracting more audience who agree with you or who appreciate your support, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's how the bigger societal changes happen, right? Is brands buy into the conversation, right? We can't leave the conversation to the politicians or the actors and actresses, right? I love the notoriety that, the different groups bring to the conversation. Brands have a role to play in that also.
Sure.
It must align with the kind of brand you are, right? And again, you can speak to veterans, right? Sorry, I'm probably going down a tangent here.
Go for it.
It just matters, that like you can't just pick a cause off a shelf and decide I'm going to do that one, right? Like, not if there's no tie back.
Well, and that's what I was trying to convey earlier about people just sticking the stickers in the window, right?
Yeah.
You're not really committed to it. You're doing it just because that's the flash in the pan today, right? That's what's getting the news coverage today,
right?
You're not really committed to it, and the first sign that the tides are going to the other side, you're going to take the sticker down, right? You're going to scrape it off your car or whatever it is,
right? So
you have to have that, and that's going to go back to you're being wishy-washy on something. So if you're going to tie that message that whatever issue it is that you're supporting into your brand, you got to be invested in it.
Yeah. I had a conversation with somebody a few weeks ago about the guy was saying, we're really having trouble coming up with our why, with our narrative. Company's been around 25 plus years, pretty small team for how long the company's been around, boutique team. And some of the people on their team have been around in the company for 20 plus years, right? So you've got the old guard and the new coming in, and the company's trying to develop their own messaging and their why. Why do we exist? What are we doing? What do we want to be doing? Who do we want to be? And the guy goes, I just, we're having so much trouble because we can't decide what we care about. And I was like, what do you mean you don't decide? Like, you can't decide. And he goes, well, some of us just don't think it matters what we personally care about. And, some of the guys who have been and some of the people, who have been in this company for a long time is like, well, we've just always done it the way we've done it. And so, and it works, right? Like,
love those words.
Yeah.
That's how we've always done it.
And we've always gotten our business by word of mouth.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. But eventually those word of mouth people, those referrals, one day they may not be there, right? And so if you're not getting your business by word of mouth, if your referrals are starting to dry up, or your company is changing tack, and so word of mouth may not be the only or best channel for you, what do you have to rely on then to state who you are and why people should talk about you and why they should be referring you, right? Like, or why they should care.
Right.
And I looked at him, and it was a much longer, complicated conversation. But I said, so what's stopping you from staking a flag in what you guys care about? And he goes, well, I don't know. We just can't decide what we want to stand for. And, that takes some time too, right?
It does.
That's, if you want to rally your team, you got to talk to your team and say what matters to us at the end of the day, right? Why did we get into what we're doing? And what kind of difference are we trying to make?
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Well, that was a good rabbit hole to go down.
Yeah. Sorry, I can totally go on tangents.
You're fine. But it's important because, again, it's part of today's landscape. When you're trying to develop your branding strategy, your brand, get your name out there, you've got to understand what it is that you're trying to do. Want what do you want people to see when they call you up?
Yeah.
Whether you're a realtor, whether you're a home inspector, whether you're a restaurant owner, whether you make copies, you're a publisher or whatever.
Right.
What do you want people to see? And are you okay? Because again, like Michael Jordan said, the other side buys shoes too.
Yep.
I mean, is that what you're going for?
Yep.
Or are you okay to say, hey, this is where I'm at. I'm okay only being part of this. This is this audience, right? This is my target audience, and the first couple bands outside the audience, I know I'm not going to get these people over here.
Yep.
And are you okay with that?
Yep.
You know, like you have zero chance at this point, right?
Right.
And are you okay with that? So you've got to make those decisions, and you got to make sure, because at some point, if it's just me, you know, when it was just me as a home inspector, it's whatever, you know, it's me, you know, if it's my problem. But when you start bringing people on, it's not just you anymore.
Well, and as you start adding to your team, how do their beliefs and their attitudes and personalities change your brand?
Yeah.
So, you know, you can't set your brand and just let it sit there, right?
Yeah.
Like it's not a one and done, right? Your brand will evolve with every new team member that you bring on, with every new strategic partnership that you make. With new marketing teams that you work with, right? Or new channels and tactics that you're trying, your brand is evolving.
Yeah.
And so you really have to consider, like, you know, if you and I were to join forces, how does my belief on veterans, which is a positive belief. My father was a Marine, so, you know, I grew up in the military family. But like, how would my values and beliefs about that affect your overall brand, for example, right?
Sure.
So one of the ways that companies can mitigate this, if they're growing their teams, is putting an employer brand strategy in place. That's a conversation for a whole nother day. I understand that, but it's about attracting the kinds of people that you want working for your business that agree with your brand, that have similar thoughts and feelings there, and can represent your brand back out in a similar way, right? There's training. You say, okay, hey, this is how we talk about things. This is how we approach certain pieces. But you're starting from a common point there, right?
Yeah. COVID, right?
Yeah.
COVID, the vaccinations, the mask. People have some feelings about all of that. Right?
Some feelings,
one or two.
Yeah, one or two.
And there were, you know, in our industry, there were people saying, hey, I had a home inspector refuse to put a mask on. I had a home inspector refuse to do this. You know, I had an agent refuse to do that. You know, they didn't want to answer you know, my policy was, they asked you to wear a mask. Put a mask on, you know, because that's just who we are, right?
Right.
We're there to do a job,
right,
not dictate what makes them comfortable. If that's what makes them comfortable, then that's what we're going to do.
Sure.
You know? So that's part of all of that, right? Is understanding that, you know, did I necessarily agree with all that stuff? Maybe not, right?
Okay.
But
you respected them enough.
But I respected their,
and you're
their
in their
thought.
homes.
Exactly, right? So if I want to grow my business, I need to at least look at it from a different vantage point.
Yeah.
And if you weren't, you know, everybody on our team was okay with it, right? They had zero problems with it. But if you came to me as an inspector and said, hey, I'm not doing it.
Yeah.
Then that's not aligning with our values, right? That's not, because you are a representation of me.
Right.
You are a representation of the brand,
yes,
you know, which is what I've created.
Yep.
You know, people call me for a certain reason because of what I've developed, you know, with any company that's successful. There's a reason why you call them. And if you're going against that, then we're going to have a much different conversation.
Yep.
You know, and it's hard conversations, but sometimes it's just what's needed to be had, you know. And I think COVID was the perfect time that we saw a lot of that happening. You know? Like just put a mask on, you know.
Yes.
That's all you gotta do.
Companies had opportunities to showcase their values in a way during COVID, in a way that they've rarely had before and will rarely have again.
Yeah.
Right. Do you remember in the first like 6 months of the pandemic, everybody was still at home. Well, most people were still at home.
Most people.
And, you know, and these, mostly the big brands came out with a flood of TV commercials about how we were all at home and we were all connecting and we were all having this shared experience. And it was touchy-feely, you know, like a kind of a warm and fuzzy blanket, you know, branding effort. And it didn't last.
No.
right? It was like 4 to 6 months, give or take, of these really heartwarming commercials about how we're all in this together. And then it just sort of died back off again.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's to this day, I have trouble remembering most of those commercials and most of those brand messages, with the exception of like a grocery store in England or something. It was like a European grocery brand about how, you know, delivering groceries to a couple of old people who could not go out into the crowds. And I just, that kind of representation of your brand is great. But if it goes back to what we were saying earlier, if you're going to do it, you really got to stick with it, right? Like, you can't be changing your brand messaging and your brand strategy every 6 months, right? You got to give it a chance to really permeate and stick. And now, again, doesn't mean you can't change your brand messaging and strategy over time.
Sure. But
if you're doing it every few months, they're not. No one's going to remember you for anything.
They're not. Going back to the weeks, right? Or the months, whatever day, week, month that we're celebrating. If that's the only time you're doing it, then, all right, well, next month we're going to change everything. And then the following month, well, this is what everybody wants with the sport, so we're going to support that too. You just, no one's going to remember you.
There's an HVAC company here in town who does... their brand cares deeply about rescue animals, dogs in particular. And there's various rescue days and organizations that throughout the Richmond area that do big events. But this brand talks about their commitment to rescue animals year round. And to me, I like the brand. I actually like the people who run the company too, right? But they've been doing it enough and long enough that I now associate this is one of the causes that their brand cares deeply about, right? Midas of Richmond. I'm blanking on the owner's name. So Mark, I think, of Midas.
We'll call him Mark.
Sorry if your name's not Mark. But he talks about like feed more, and he talks about his personal history with hunger when he was a kid.
Sure.
And, the story that stuck with me about is how his mom used to stretch a gallon of milk with water, right, for the week. And he took those experiences, and Midas is a growing company with tons of employees in the Richmond area. But the owner, and it sounds like a lot of his leadership team, care very deeply about hunger issues, right? And they're building part of their brand strategy is to take the name recognition and the good that their company is doing in the Richmond area and putting it towards a cause that they care deeply about. And that's not he doesn't do it once a month, or I'm sorry, 1 month out of the year.
It's all year.
It's all year, right? And when you market it consistently, when it's built into your brand strategy, people will start to remember and associate you for it, right? So your brand can do a lot of good if you put some effort into it.
Absolutely. So we've been talking probably close to an hour now.
Oh.
Yeah.
Goodness.
It goes by quick. So first person someone should call. They start up a business. They have a business idea. I need to get it going. Do they call you or Blair first? Who do they call first?
So I actually, you might think I'm strange for this, but my answer is not me.
Okay.
If you are just starting a business, grab yourself a logo, make sure you know why you're in business, grab yourself a logo and get going. Literally just get going. Get some customers, get some work, build your business. Come to me 3 years in.
Okay.
Because by then, you've got a really solid idea of what you're doing, why you're doing it, what's working and what's not. And we can truly dive into messaging and narrative that, you got through the first couple of years. You're all over the place in the first few years of business. Let's be real, right? Everybody is. But after you've been doing that for a few years, then we talk, right? And we build you a plan for the next 10 that, takes you from level 3 to level 7, right? You talk to Blair first then. It's the short answer. What was a very long answer? You talk to Blair. You get yourself a website. You get some customers and some work.
Gotcha.
And then you come to me.
So when they're ready to come to you, how do they get a hold of you?
So my Skylar Consulting, it's skylarsbc.com. Or come find me on LinkedIn. I'm babbling all the time on LinkedIn. I'm just throwing thoughts out there. But I do free discovery calls, right? Yep. Conversations about where your business is, where it wants to go. What do you need now versus what can you do in like 2 years, right? Yeah. I'm not a believer that you have to have absolutely everything on day one, obviously, sure. Right? I think it's more important about meeting the company where it is and figuring out the best way to build that strategy so it works long term.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you for having me. Today's been great.
Gotta wake Courtney up now. We'll do this again.
I'd love that. Thank you so much.